We meet on the land. As human beings, we inhabit the earth, that which gives us life. The land has been stewarded by First Peoples for millennia. Depending on where you are, it may be a different territory, different nations. Here in the area of the Coast Salish peoples, and I particularly am located where it is the land, traditional unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh. I'm Reverend Meg Roberts, and I have the privilege of being the minister here with Beacon Unitarian Church. For any guests and newcomers, there's a special welcome that we offer you to find out more on our website and also to find the Beacon Connecting form. If you want to fill it out, we can connect you in with some of the leaders to be able to talk. I'd be happy to chat with you. And also we have on our homepage an order of service for people who like to follow along. Janet, I think, is going to drop the website address into our chat. For those who want to access the chat, if you're on a computer, if you take your cursor to the bottom of the Zoom screen, probably one of the options will be chat. You may have to look under the more to find it. Every fourth Sunday, we have a conversation group for about 15-20 minutes after the service. If you have time and want to stay on for the newcomers, then I'd be happy to, we can have a meet and greet and get to know each other a little bit, and I can tell you things about Beacon if you have any questions. Also, a special welcome to our families. And I see that Ashley is here. So I don't want to put her on the spot, but if Ashley, if there's anything you wanted to say, feel free to unmute. Otherwise, I can go ahead. Anything you wanted to chime in here?
Yeah, thanks, Meg. I'll just say hello, and if folks have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. We're just continuing on with, I think it's our final week of the Mystery Buddies program, and you can find more information on our programming on the Beacon website. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. And for those who haven't met Ashley before, we are blessed to have her. She's our Director of Religious Exploration for Children. Beacon is a caring community, and not just our newcomers, both our newcomers and our families and all of us are very welcome here. Our opening words are by Elizabeth Strong. Today, we celebrate a dream awakening. Today, we worship with renewed hope in our hearts. Today, we act on an audacity of hopes and dreams for the future. Today, we begin the hard work for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. For today is a day like no other, and it is ours to shape with vision and action. Let us worship together and celebrate a dream awakening. We will light a chalice, or whether I will light it here, and if you've got one at home that you would like to, we're going to light this chalice to be a beacon of light on these dreams of hope in our hearts and awaken in us the commitment to work to create justice and equity. I have a story that I would like to share with you. And you can either choose, there's parts of today that we're going to do some spotlighting, but we also know that some folks like to have it in gallery view so they can see lots of different faces. We'll leave that for you. This story is The Dog and the Heartless King. It's adapted from a book from long ago and many lands, written by Sophia Lyon-Fahs. Once upon a time, there was a king who cared for nobody but himself. He'd grown rich from the high taxes he had forced his people to pay, while they had become poorer and poorer. He lived in a gorgeous palace, while the poor people who built it for him still lived in thatched huts and tumble-down hovels. The king's table was always heaped with delicious food, while most of his people only had one plain meal a day. and sometimes not even that. But the Heartless King did not care. He had what he wanted, and that was enough for him. One day, a hunter came to the palace gate, intending to teach the Heartless King a lesson. The hunter brought with him an enormous dog. The king was fond of hunting, and this enormous dog fascinated him. So the hunter and the dog were both welcomed into the palace grounds. But the enormous dog was not an ordinary dog, and her bark was like a roar of thunder. The first time she opened her mouth and barked, the awful noise shook the walls of the palace and frightened the king and all his courtiers. If the dog had stopped with one or two barks, the matter might have been forgotten. But again and again, her fierce roaring shook the palace and the earth itself. Before long, there was no resting between barks. Nobody in the palace could hear themselves talk. The king was desperate and sent for the hunter. He said, "Why does your dog make such a deafening noise?" "The dog is hungry," said the hunter. Immediately, the king ordered that a big plateful of meat be brought. In almost no time at all, the enormous dog licked the plate clean. Then at once, she began barking again. The second plateful of meat was brought. This the dog disposed of just as quickly as the first, and again the dog began barking. Over and over the plate was filled, and over the enormous dog quickly ate the whole plateful and began barking as loudly as ever. The king was angry. He called the hunter and said, "You and your dog must leave the palace at once. We cannot endure this deafening noise any longer." But the hunter was firm. "Your Majesty, we have been sent to you by one greater than you are. We are here to stay." The king was frightened. He grasped the arms of his chair and stared at the hunter. The king was not accustomed to having anyone speak to him in this manner. "Will nothing satisfy the hunger of your enormous dog?" the king said at last. "Nothing that is easy for you to give," said the hunter. "Your Majesty, there are people in this kingdom who are eating all the food and who are not sharing it with those who do the work in the field to make the food grow. As a result, there are people who are always hungry. The dog feels the hunger of every person in this kingdom who does not have enough food to eat. As long as even one person is hungry, this dog will be hungry and will keep barking." On hearing the hunter say this, the king was even more frightened than ever. It had never entered his thoughts that he'd been doing anything wrong. He thought that the people of his kingdom were simply supposed to do exactly what he always wanted them to do. It had never occurred to him that a king should think of the happiness of anyone except himself. He was now angry from his head to his feet, inside and out. Either he would go mad hearing the continuous barking of that enormous dog, or else something would have to be done, and very quickly. So he called his wise advisors together and said, "What shall I do?" The wise ones bowed their heads and walked off to think over the question. But try as hard as they could, the advisors could see only two possible solutions. Either the enormous dog must be killed, or else every hungry person in the kingdom must be fed. No one was willing to kill the enormous dog.
Sharon calling.
So that meant there was only one thing left to do. Everybody in the kingdom must somehow be fed. The wise advisors were very clear in their minds about it. They returned to the king and told him plainly what had to be done. They had to shout, mind you, because the enormous dog was still barking. The king hesitated no longer. "Put all the servants on the palace grounds to work at once," he commanded. "Go to the storerooms, get all the bags of rice you can, pile them high on carts, take also meat from my cupboard, gather vegetables and fruits from my garden. Send the servants out with these loaded carts into all the towns and villages in my kingdom. Command the servants to find all the people who are hungry. Give them generously of these foods, and keep on giving food until not one single person in this land is hungry." The advisors hurried away to do as their king commanded. Soon there was shouting and laughing, hustling and bustling all over the palace. In fact, the royal servants made so much noise they could hardly hear the barking of the enormous dog. Presently, a long line of carts piled high with bags and baskets of food rolled out through the palace gates. All day long and day after day, the carts kept rolling until they'd gone to every village in the land and until food was taken to every house where somebody was hungry. At last, the day came when the enormous dog really stopped barking and lay down quietly beside the king's chair. The dog was satisfied. All the people inside the palace ground were happy and at peace in their minds. Everywhere in the land, the people were contented. For the next few years, the enormous dog stayed at the king's side to be sure the king never reverted to his old ways. A few times, the dog barked to remind the king about justice, and every time the king remembered the important lesson he had learned. Finally, the dog was convinced the king truly understood the meaning of justice. So one morning, she simply got up, walked out of the palace, and went to bark for justice in a new land. Thank you for listening. I'll ask if Janet wants to bring up the next slide for us. Today we are having a new member welcoming ceremony that has been adapted to a unique situation. Francie Luann wishes to join Beacon as a member, but is not able to join us in person as she is in hospital at the moment. So in recognition of her extraordinary circumstances, including there being COVID restrictions, I couldn't go there with a membership book for her to sign. We had her respond to the questions electronically, and I will read her responses. This process is a creative solution that fits within Beacon's bylaw intentions while respecting Beacon safety protocols. We will share this recording of the ceremony with Francie afterwards as well. So imagine her there with us because no, she is with us in spirit. To help with this ceremony are Sue Sparlin, the chair of our Connecting Committee, and our board president, David Christensen.
Any community is strengthened when those who have been friends decide to take the next step and become Beacon members. This morning, we welcome the following new member to our congregation, Francie Luann.
In keeping with present safety guidelines, by participating in this ceremony, we recognize it as the equivalent of your signing our membership book, and your membership is recognized as starting this day. We'll have you sign the Beacon membership book and date it for today as soon as it is safe to do so. We are so happy you are a part of this congregation and invite you to share a couple of sentences about what it means to you to join Beacon as a member.
Here are the words Francie sent to be shared. When I first started attending Beacon U, when my partner Jose and I moved to New Westminster in 2007, I shied away from being involved. I'd been a compulsive volunteer at Vancouver Unitarian and needed retirement. We spent our first 6 months in Buenos Aires, and some of you have read about that. Eventually, Theology Pup came along, and I found myself happily facilitating this group. We continue to meet on Zoom, and David is being Francie till I can return to this form of ministry. The appreciation of our regular members has been sustaining for me. Thank you for accepting me into Beacon membership. Thank you, Francie. I'm going to ask you and the congregation to now join in this new member ceremony by reading aloud parts on the screen that Janet will show. You, of course, will be muted where you are and reading it aloud. Sue will lead the parts for the congregation and also for existing members, and I'll read the section aloud for all of us to join in at the end. Now, Sue will lead with the first words.
Francie, we welcome you into our beloved Beacon community. and into the larger circle of Unitarian Universalism. We welcome the enrichment of depth, diversity, and experience that you bring to our fellowship, and we look forward to getting to know each other better.
Francie, do you accept the rights and responsibilities of membership in Beacon Unitarian Church?
Francie has directed me to say on her behalf, yes.
Francie, do you strive to follow our Unitarian principles, uphold our covenant of right relations, and support the mission and vision of this congregation?
Francie has asked me to say on her behalf, yes.
Francie, will you continue to bring to this community all that you are, contributing and helping create a loving community?
Francie's asked me to say on her behalf, yes.
Will the existing members of Beacon Unitarian Church join with me in saying the following? Today, I reaffirm my membership in Beacon Unitarian Church and promise to uphold our covenant of right relations. I realize that membership requires a renewal of commitment and of involvement to support our mission and vision. To our newest member, I look forward to learning from you and with you.
If you'd all join me in saying the words aloud. We promise to support one another in this Beacon community. We will be generous with our gifts so we connect with compassion and respect, inspire learning and spiritual growth, transform through joy and justice. Together we create a community of all ages with free minds and compassionate hearts.
Please join me in offering a warm welcome to our longtime friend and newest member, Francie Luann.
Welcome, Francie. Thanks, Sue and David, and thanks to everybody. We look forward to sharing that video with Francie soon. I want to share a few words of reflection with you today. The moon shone bright the other day as I stepped outside on my balcony for some fresh air in the evening. I was struck by how beautiful the world is and how cruel it can be at the same time. The moon falls equally on the places where people are in prison because they spoke out against governments, as well as on those who murdered others. The moonlight falls on the houses of those in happy partnerships as well as those in trouble. It falls on the rich neighborhoods and on the reserves where there are people without clean drinking water. Those whose lives have been very hard hit by COVID, and others who are challenged by it and are still secure in their homes and incomes. It's in times like this when I need to remind myself of the values that give me hope, words that remind me about what I aspire to in living my life. The principles that Unitarians hold have values like that. Today, I want to consider the second of those principles, that we affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. This is our principal theme for February. In our Unitarian principles, justice is mentioned twice. In the one I've just said, promoting justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and in the other, promoting world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Of course, the two statements are inextricably linked. For there to be justice at the global level, we also need to have justice between individuals and within and between nations. When I think of the term justice, I realize that there are various aspects to the term. Initially, I think of the notion of fairness, of doing what seems morally right. What seems morally right varies for different people and within different cultures. Justice also implies a system that establishes law and order. This system includes the government that creates the laws, the judiciary system with the police to enforce the laws, and the courts to sit in judgment of those who are charged with breaking those laws. When we consider the term justice, we also believe that the process needs to be considered fair and unbiased for the outcome to be considered just. The symbol, of course, for justice is the blindfolded goddess with scales in her hand. She's blindfolded so that she's not influenced by any characteristics of the people involved, whether personal wealth or poverty, status, race, gender, ability, or sexual orientation. The process of justice should be equal for all. Unfortunately, we know it's not always that way. We just have to think of the disproportionate number of Indigenous and Black people in our Canadian jails for us to consider that justice is blind to race. We know it's not. And yet, we want to work to try to make our legal system as fair as we can. These days, we are hearing more in the news about systemic injustice. As Unitarians, we need to really understand what the difference is between equality and equity. When we do, we can find out what forms of equity are needed in our society now. In February's theme column in the newsletter, I included these words by Reverend Emily Gage. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations points us towards something beyond inherent worth and dignity. It points us to the larger community. It gets at collective responsibility. It reminds us that treating people as human beings is not simply something we do one-on-one, but something that has systemic implications and can inform our entire cultural way of being. Compassion is something that we can easily act on individually. We can demonstrate openness, give people respect, and treat people with kindness on our own, but we need one another to achieve equity and justice. Justice, equity, and compassion are all part of that same package. Just as this second principle overlaps with the first about inherent worth and dignity, so this is related as well to our seventh principle, the interdependent web of all existence. I'm going to ask Janet to bring up a slide that I think illustrates the differences between equality and equity. This image is courtesy of the Advanced Equity and Inclusion Guide to Municipalities out of Ottawa. You'll see there are three images. In the first image, it's assumed that everyone will benefit from the same size support, so they can see over a wall, but we see that's not necessarily the case. In the second image, individuals are given different support sizes to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game, and in this way they are being treated equitably, so all three see over the wall. It is in the third image where all three can see the game without any supports or accommodations because the cause of the inequity was addressed. That is, creating a fence that they could actually see through. This is that systemic barrier being removed. Equity is part of the process of justice, but it also must include removing barriers within the system that created them in the first place. Sometimes those barriers are things like racial justice. Sometimes they are economic and social class advantages, such as those things that also impact people's health determinants over time and over generations. Thanks, Janet. When we think about equity in Canada, there is a federal Employment Equity Act, originally from 1986 and updated to 1995. The purpose of the Act is to correct the conditions of disadvantage in employment experienced by women, Indigenous people, persons with disabilities, members of visible minorities, by giving effect to the principle that employment equity means more than treating people in the same way, it also requires special measures and accommodations for differences. Now, the Employment Equity Act, as I found out when I was doing some research for our anti-racism course this winter, it's federal legislation, and as such applies only to a narrow group of industries that are federally regulated under the Canadian Constitution. And overall, that covers 10% of the Canadian workforce only. So the scope of the Employment Equity Act is quite limited, and the vast number of employers, including nearly all retailers and manufacturing companies, fall outside of that jurisdiction. While every province has human rights legislation to prohibit discrimination against women and various minorities, no province has a law that is analogous to this Federal Employment Equity Act. So what would it be like for us to reach out through our MLAs to ask what's happening in this regard here in our province? What would it be like to reach out to the organizations that we may be part of at work to see where their employment equity stands? Another area that has an example for equity includes, in Canada, access to clean drinking water or clean water at all. Of course, under the United Nations bills, this is a basic human right. Yet in Canada, we don't have that for many Indigenous communities. There was a federal promise to find long-term solutions for all First Nations communities by March 31st of this year, ending the need for long-term water advisories. And that goal is a long way from being met. The Federal Auditor General, Karen Hogan's report that came out this last Thursday, states that the federal government has not done enough to ensure people in First Nations communities have reliable access to safe drinking water. Since the Prime Minister made that commitment, it's true that 100 advisories have been lifted, but 60 remain in effect in 41 First Nations communities as of November 2020. And some communities won't be able to get clean water out of their tap for many years. The government's Indigenous services efforts to lift boil water advisories have been constrained by a funding policy that hasn't been updated in 30 years, and by the lack of regulatory regime that includes legal protections comparable with other communities in Canada. I was in a Canadian Unitarian Council circle conversation this last Wednesday. I think some of you were in it too, with Stephen Paquette, who's an Anishinaabe elder. Stephen pointed out to us that there was a non-Indigenous community in Ontario that had a crisis with its drinking water in the last year, and that was addressed in 10 days. Many of these Indigenous communities have had water issues for years, some even decades. So, if you want to look at the government working toward equitable treatment, now is the time to advocate again for them to follow the Auditor General's recommendations, to partner with First Nations for the solutions that they know that they need. For anyone who's interested in following up with the federal government, there are various ways you can do it in writing to your MP and to the ministers responsible. I put a link in Beacon's face page book as an example of one way of doing it. You can also write your own letter. So that really is like that second image where there are different sizes to be able for those people to be able to see over the wall. But to get to the third solution where that barrier isn't there, it means to get at the systemic root of the issues. To do that, we have to put pressure on the government to shift the nature of their relationships with Indigenous communities, to get rid of the paternalistic Indian Act and really recognize nation-to-nation relationships and act out of that reality. Sometimes in this way, we need to be loud, like the dog barking towards the king. The dog said, "Will nothing satisfy the hunger of your enormous dog?" "Nothing that is easy for you to give," said the hunter. Justice and equity are that hunger. Systemic changes are not easy. They take time and ongoing commitment, but they won't happen without us calling our governments to account. Our principles do give me hope. They help to guide me when I'm struck with the news of the day or with human interactions I have with others. They are, of course, ideals that I shoot towards, and when I miss those ideals, because I'm human and get caught up in prejudice or prejudging others, or I'm feeling overwhelmed and not knowing where to start on issues, I consider these principles again. Unitarian Universalist minister and author Robert Fulghum says, "I do not want your sympathy for the needs of humanity. I want your muscle. I do not want to talk about what you understand about this world. I want to know what you will do about it. I do not want to know what you hope. I want to know what you will work for." As you go about your week, consider how you live out this principle, affirming and promoting compassion, equity, and justice in human relations that you are part of, whether in your home, your workplace, your city, or in our society. Consider what you think justice is and how you might find ways to be more equitable in responding to others. Consider ways to connect with compassion so that you too can embody more fully this principle that we hold so dear. It is a deeply satisfying thing to do, to act and put our muscle into that commitment. I hope that we all will find ways to do justice and love kindness and walk humbly within this beautiful web of existence that glistens in the moonlight on us all. Thank you. We're now going to shift into some moments of meditation through words and music. So I invite you to get comfortable, take a couple of deep breaths, let go the stresses of the week just for this moment, as I share some words by Leif Seligman, and afterwards Ming Shren will play some music for us. Loving energy in the universe, we pause in the stillness to rest for a moment, to quiet ourselves so that we can feel what stirs within us. Each breath draws us closer to the pulse of life, and with each exhalation, we make room for something new. May we find in this gathering the comfort of those who care. May we encounter patience along our growing edges and compassion in our most tender spots. Here, may we find the inspiration and encouragement we need to face our challenges and nurture ourselves. And in the presence of suffering across the globe, may we redouble our efforts to practice kindness where we are, with the hope that the light of our actions travels like the light of faraway stars. May our gestures of compassion and generosity seed possibility. May we walk humbly with one another, choosing reconciliation over resentment as we try to live right-sized. When life presses in and shifts us off balance, when pain assails us, when frustration mounts, may the rhythm of our breath steady us and bring us back to a place of gratitude. Amen. Blessed be. Thanks, Janet. We have a special once-a-year collection for the Canadian Unitarian Council's Sharing Our Faith Fund. We are all part of the CUC, and its vision, our interdependence, calls us to love and justice. Congregations apply to the Sharing Our Faith Fund for special growth projects, like helping get staffing, whether for religious exploration, for ministry, outreach projects, projects for youth, for many wonderful things. And Beacon Board is thinking of applying for this grant this spring, so we encourage you to give generously so you can see our Unitarian Universalist movement grow in Canada. If you'd like to contribute, Beacon will gratefully accept your donation. The best way is through Interact, sent to treasurer@beaconunitarian.org, and you just indicate in the note CUC Sharing the Faith. And sharing our faith, I guess I put sharing the faith, either will do. Heather will know. And if you aren't able to do Interact, contact Heather Brown separately and she can give you other information. We'll roll through to the next slide and Sue will lead us in our song response.
For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad.
Thanks, Sue. If you want to hear the next, we're going to sing a song, Woyaya, and this video is courtesy of Leah Morris and the Silver Springs Unitarian Universalist Church. Woyaya means we keep going in the Ga language of Ghana. I wanted to also, because we're going to try something a little bit different, we're going to show this video, and also if you don't have a hymnal where it would be the Teal 1020, if you don't have that, we're going to have Janet put the words in the chat. And if you aren't able to access that, you can just listen and enjoy. It's simple words. And we are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know within. And we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. It will be hard, we know. And the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Woyaya. We are going. Heaven knows where we are going, but we know within. So I'm going to bring up the video and we can enjoy this beautiful rendition.
We are going. Heaven knows where we are going, but we know we will. We are going. Heaven knows where we are going. We know we're there. We will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. We are going. Heaven knows where we are going. We know we're there. We will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there. We know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will will get there, but we know we will. We are going. Heaven knows where we are going. We'll know we're there. Oh yeah, yeah. 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 We'll know we're there.
I'm going to ask Janet to bring up 2 slides before our closing words. I want to thank all those who have helped with this service, all the technical folks, as well as the musicians, and those behind the scenes who help with the Zoom recording, editing, and the order of service, and then, of course, afterwards, our coffee hour. Thanks, Janet. Just to let you know, I'm going to be on study leave in the coming week. I'll be back into the office. I'll be away Monday, March 1st to the 9th, and I'll be back in the office March the 10th. Our pastoral support team, Judy and Laura, are available for pastoral conversations during that time. I'm excited that you all get to enjoy next Sunday. My colleague and friend, Reverend Wendy Luella Perkins, is back, and Sue White is doing a leading with her. We know that in this time, she was with us back in March of 2020, and she provides a wonderful singing meditation practice, soulful singing. And so she will be doing that with all of you. I hope you will invite family, friends to join that day. After the service, of course, we also have our coffee hour conversation groups. A reminder that during the first check-in group, I'll meet with any newcomers and visitors who want to stop and say hello with me. We'll have about a 5-10 minute break after the service before we do our check-in groups. And now our closing words by Robert Kaufman. We come together today to share our deepest concerns, speaking and singing words of inspiration and hope. We've committed ourselves to do what we can to ease the burdens of those who suffer, to stand for decency and compassion. We've pledged to work for a more wholesome environment for us and for all the generations that will follow. But these are just words. The hymns we sing are just songs. All our reflections are just idle thoughts. When we convert them all into loving and responsible action throughout the week, then and only then will this morning become what we want it to be, a time of worship. If you'd like to join me in extinguishing the chalices, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. And Janet will bring up our slide with the words, carry the flame, and Sue will lead us.
And if you're on gallery view, you can reach out your hands and it'll look like we're all joining hands. Carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again. Carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again.
Thanks, Sue.